For those who are here for the 110 poetry reading, I'm going to now talk to you about American public opinion and the election. I am delighted to be here with the setup note that cautionary note that I'm likely to bring a cautionary note to the overall enthusiasm about the election. What I discover, though, is that the more days lapse between the data and now, the less cautionary I become, and so I have to check myself and not get caught up in the not just the enthusiasm, but in the evolving sense of hope as it's translating into a new administration. I do, however, the more I focus on the election, the more I focus on the data, the more I look at the intersection of historic and economic forces, and I think also unique political leadership combined with extraordinary shifting of political alignments in the country to conclude that we are dealing with extraordinary opportunities. And I certainly don't come here with a view that attitudes are static. I come here with a respect for the public and voters, and my respect grew as I watched them consider their choices in this election, and engage in terms of participating, but also engage, I think, intellectually and information gathering and consideration, and came to conclusions that led to this near landslide victory, this political earthquake. So I come to this with even more respect for the voters as they do it, but I also come to this, as Bob mentioned, from a whole range of experiences with other leaders, and opinions are dynamic. And as I look at this, I believe more than ever that the cautions that are there are only things for us to caution ourselves and understand why people bring what looks to us to be either contradictory opinions or ambivalence, but I actually think most of it is completely sensible, given the fact that the conservatives have spent the last decade destroying government. And so, as I watch a $700 billion bailout package and the intricacies as its purpose changes, as the fine print is apparent, why wouldn't voters say that anything this government chooses to act on wouldn't be corrupted by the process that they've watched produce incompetent government, corrupted government? Why do we think a health care plan crafted by the current forces wouldn't produce something that would undermine their health care, rather than something that would actually be in the public interest or help consumers? So I come to this. I think the public has thought big thoughts and is ready to respond to this moment and provide support for those who lead in bold ways, but understand they have very sensible reasons for wanting it to be done in ways that check the power of and the excesses of elites, both political and economic. And that much of what we look at and say, well, that looks like what went wrong in Kansas, I think they raise issues that we should pay attention to in thinking about how we shape what goes forward. So we've had an election in which I will at some point actually go through some data, but I want to tell you where I think we came out in this election, with a larger narrative, and then go to the data. First, we've had an extraordinary change election. That is, you'll see that the data that's there. In fact, I'm hitting the forward button. Oh, there it goes. Okay. I'll just take this is the right direction, wrong track numbers, just as a backdrop to everything else. As you watch, this graph started soon after the 2004 election on right direction, wrong track. Somewhere around a third of the way in there, you can see the 2006 earthquake election, and we've gone so far beyond the earthquake of 2006 to what produced the earthquake of 2008. So we've come to an election in which we have 80% of the country voting for, saying that we're on the wrong track. So so we have a powerful sense that we have to change the status quo. It combines with a deep sense of financial crisis, economic crisis, deepening crisis that is squeezing people, combined with a simultaneous election in which there are leaders emerging with increasingly very distinct ideological positions, with clarity, having major debates about the direction of the country, and the country watching and deciding on that, and giving us a mandate that is very different than previous mandates. We've done these exit polls together, Democracy Corps, Campaign for America's Future. I apologize for not thanking them for all our collaboration and everybody who participated in the project. But we've been doing these polls since 1996. Where we've done a enlarged sample to be able to look at the demographic trends and look at what's the mandate. Why do people vote the way they did? What do they want to expect to happen in this election? And we'll look at those, and you'll see some that we expect them to protect. If we went back to 96, is protect Medicare and education. Okay, this is so much bigger. That is what was debated. And what they decided in this election was so much bigger than any of those prior elections that we looked at. And so the mandate has, I think, much more meaning in terms of going forward. There also took place at the same time as a major realignment of political forces. Democrats emerged with a much bigger advantage in party identification, but it goes beyond that. That they're just emerging, the country is changing. These things have been suppressed in their political expression up until 2006, when we saw these emerging demographic trends and cultural trends play themselves out in 2006. America is a more and more diverse country. Its diversity is not just a fact of demography or even an electoral fact. It says something about the character of the country. And different generations came to view that diversity differently. So you had this 74% of the population vote who were white in this election, down 4 points from the last presidential election, but significantly from 20 years ago. So you have a much more diverse country, and the younger you get, the more diverse it becomes. One of, I think, President Clinton's legacies will be the whole concept that diversity is a strength for America and distinguishes America from the rest of the world. Conservatives, Republicans, in some sense, have tried to suppress it. George Bush and Karl Rove tried to tactically manage it, but we're dealing with just a bigger sea change in what is the character of this country. And so when over 90% of African Americans vote for the Democrats, but over 2/3 of Latinos, over 2/3 of Asians, 78% of Jews. My guess is 2/3 of Muslims. I have no idea. I haven't seen those numbers. Across the diversity, unmarried women, 70% for who are 20% of the electorate voting. We're dealing, 57% of suburbs voting for the Democrats. Suburbs used to be Republican territory, and so you have as you get these growing suburbs, more professional elements, part of the suburbs, more diversity. The growing suburbs are ending up more and more Democratic. So you're ending up with this realignment of forces in which Republicans end up confined to the South, in some sense trapped by an old South dynamic, as white voters in the South became more Republican in this election than previous, while white voters everywhere else became more Democratic. Also combined with evangelical support in more Appalachian-type rural areas, but the Republican Party is trapped in a brand of conservatism that is very old and aging. And so you have a change in the country which is being expressed in this election. It got, the swing in 2006 was 10 points from the previous, comparison from the 2004 congressional election. This was a 10-point swing presidentially as well. So we have this confirmation, twice. That we're in just a total new world, new alignments that's expressed through the election. But it had a big economic debate. We should not. To me, one of the most important things that happened in this election was from the third debate to the end of the election, John McCain ran on Joe the plumber, and it was an uninterrupted argument. It was the argument they made for the entire last phase of the election. It was not a cute argument about Joe the plumber. It was a big argument about tax burden. It was about distribution. It was about whether you tax them, whether you tax burden middle class or whether you tax those making over $250,000. It was about whether you continue the Bush economic policies, but above all, its tax policies into the future. And you will see in the data the country got it and moved more and more to Obama on all of those issues in that debate. And when they voted at the end, they knew exactly what they were doing. They voted for this change. They understood it and voted for it. It also takes us, I think, also to the investment agenda, which takes us to the infrastructure agenda, which is here. I don't think the country fully got to the investment agenda. You'll see very strong polling data, for it. But that's because I think investment is becoming, we've gone through a tax distribution debate, which was essentially what the election was fought about. But we've moved very quickly now into a debate of how you now deal with short-term, how do you deal with the recession, and how do you deal with long-term growth. And the country knows that it's entering that debate. And so whatever we have here on investment and infrastructure, I think is just a piece of a story. So I think we are moving. I believe people are conscious of this as a potential new era. Not just a change from one administration to another. And that will, in the end, that will depend on whether we articulate in our various areas of activity, whether we articulate this new era and the meaning, and also whether we succeed. That is, whether these new coalitions and whether this new agenda, whether the leaders are able to succeed. In the end, Reagan was able to have political success because they had policy success. Not great for the country, but they had policy success. Bill Clinton had, immense policy challenges and defeats, including not passing health care, which helped define, and place the limits on their contribution. We're at a moment where succeeding enables us to define this period and make it real for a longer period. So let me talk about some of the data. This was the wrong track data. This was simply the vote trend, but in this election between McCain and Obama, the point to look at is that right before the financial crisis, right after the Democratic and Republican conventions, McCain moved into a slight lead, basically even in the race at that point. And then you had the financial crisis in mid-September. And then you watched, not an immediate, it was, it just kind of almost an inexorable rise in Obama's vote. Not driven in Marxist sense immediately, it's an economic issue, therefore we vote Democratic, in that kind of literal way. People watched the way McCain and Obama dealt with the economy and the financial crisis, and moved increasingly to Obama, and gave him, in the end, that 53% majority, which Democrats have not seen in any of our lifetimes. When we look at who you trust on the issues, I'm going to skip this for actually just obviously emerged dominant on all these issues, including the economy. Government spending is something you'd expect Republicans to dominate, but it's really quite marginal advantage. But on whether Obama would raise my taxes, we tracked that throughout the election, whether he would raise your taxes. And what you saw is you basically had about 54%, pretty sizable majority for most of this campaign who said Obama was going to raise their taxes. That does describe him well as someone who will raise my taxes. What you saw is that with the presidential debates, that broke, to pretty close to even on whether he would. And at the very end, in this final poll that we did on Election Day, what you saw is that the number saying he'd raise his taxes dropped from 51 to 46. So that when the election finished, they had a tax debate, and people concluded that Obama genuinely was not going to raise their taxes. They really would be for the middle class. They invested heavily in this argument, in their advertising, in what he said. People were cynical, and they, in the end, said, we'll go with them. We trust them on this. And if you look at the comparative point of who you trust on taxes, who would do a better job on taxes is this question. Basically, they were fairly evenly split, with McCain having the advantage for some period. But what you see at the end of the third presidential debate is when Joe Plummer was featured by McCain. What you saw is a kind of a steady rise in the number of people that they trust Obama on handling taxes, comparing between McCain and Obama. So as they made their debate with increasing ferocity, with increasing rhetoric about socialism and redistributionists, in the end, Obama ended up with a 9-point advantage on who you trust to handle taxes. And so if we think about where we came from, we really genuinely are in a new era. Now, when we get to now what to do on the economy, since the economy is the big driver of this, we give people can choose twice here, but the first choice, the dominant one, not surprising, is reducing unemployment and getting the economy moving as the main priority. We're going to have to unpack that in kind of future polls, but that's kind of where the starting point. But it's impressive how much alternative energy and getting off of foreign oil is a very high priority. Energy is at the top of the tier of this, and then healthcare. But I circle reducing the federal deficit because it's there, but is significantly lower down the list as a priority. In 1992, after the election, when I was polling for President Clinton, we asked this question because we were facing the question of whether the deficits should be the priority. Now, I was not, for those who remember that, I was in the fight against the deficits being the main priority of the administration, and so I'm sure I wrote this question with that in mind. But there was even with that wording, reducing the federal deficit then was 19% people choosing the federal deficit. It's 8% now, when we've asked the same identical question now, so that reducing the deficit just is not at the top of what people were looking at. They are concerned about wasteful spending when they are so strained financially. That's different. We'll come to that. But the deficit's not their starting point of what are the priorities now for the government or in thinking about the economy. Now, we looked at a number of issues that define the economy, and we gave them a long list. I'm putting this one at the top because it was the one that got the strongest response, and it relates very much. It's values related, but it also relates to the kind of excesses. Too much debt, little savings, high interest payments that leave people squeezed. As a very serious problem. 62%, very serious problem, and it's the highest. And it relates to the kind of behavior, I think, both personal and corporate, that have got us here, that they want to address. All right, but then we asked a long list of things. Right below that, and the very serious is about 10 points lower. But we basically had a cluster of four of policy areas in which you get people very focused on the problem. People at risk of losing their job and being able to find one with similar benefits, like with health care. The inability to get good jobs because they're being outsourced. The insecurity where people find their pensions not offering the incomes they thought they would deserve, and then failure to make investments we need in education and research to maintain America's leadership. So those were kind of, in terms of what are the problems in this economy, what we're talking about in investment and investment in infrastructure as well is closely related. Then we get to a range of other kinds of problems that are a little bit lower down, though all of them are of great concern. When we ask what are the future priorities that the administration and the Congress should be addressing, at the top is ending foreign oil dependence on foreign oil, then ending the Iraq War, regulating the banking system, and dealing with health insurance. But as we go further down, again, you still have 60%. Saying make job-creating investments in America's aging roads and transportation systems and stimulate new economic activity. You have 34% choosing it as like the top priority, and then one of our top few, and then 60% near the top. So it is not the very top priority right now, but it is close to the top. But I believe we're moving into a new debate over how we address the economy. All right. Here's where the caution comes, because when we ask people about investment and worries about overspending, we begin to run into caution. So we gave people a choice when explaining their vote. He says, when I voted, I was more concerned that Obama will raise taxes and increase the government spending. Or when I voted, I was more concerned that McCain will continue the economic policies that have cost us jobs and caused higher prices. Now, we win that by, 46%, but 46% to me is a real number. It's a big number. It's a serious worry that we'll go too far on taxes and spending. It will be when I did polling for Tony Blair, they reassured at the end of their campaign, this is the first election for Blair, that he reassured continuously they were not going to raise taxes during the life of the parliament, that they would maintain for 2 years the budget levels of the conservative government and operate with new priorities. When people came to believe that was true, there was a surge in desire to invest in the NHS, the National Health Service. That is, the more people became comfortable with the idea you weren't going to raise my taxes and that you were going to have accountable government, they became much more supportive of investment. I think we're at a point in time. They've come through a government that has given nothing to the middle class, wasted the money, given us corrupt and incompetent government. Obama had won the election saying, I'm not going to raise taxes. They gave him the benefit of the doubt on that, shifting at the end. Okay? But I think we're at a point in time. I believe Obama's going to cut middle-class taxes as a central part of the economic policy, and I think we'll be in a new phase. But the people aren't going to go for investment unless they believe they're getting accountable government and the right priorities when it comes to taxes. Again, reinforcing this point, I'm more worried that we'll fail to make the investments we need to create jobs and strengthen the economy, or I'm more worried that we'll go too far in increasing government spending and end up raising taxes to pay for it, even split. Okay, so it does mean that if progressives are going to make the case for investment, they got to also make the case that they are going to give them a different kind of government. One that's accountable, one that is reformed, one is not corrupt, where special interests don't play a big role, where people get their money's worth. People, we think we worry, that we're the ones who worry about ordinary people, but there is a reality. There is a financial crisis. They are in crisis economically. Their incomes did not go up, and now they're going down significantly. Taxes is real money, and people want this money used. We'll see for the right ends, but they begin with a lot of nervousness that you'll do it in the right way. And I think political reform ought to be as central to our agenda as the policies that we're pursuing, because that's what says it's going to be done in the right way for the right people. But the winds of change, I've given the caution on the taxes and spending side, but when you go through the survey on every area, they think the middle class is being squeezed in this country, and the opportunity is declining. They think that it is global economic forces. People are not blaming other groups for the decline of the middle class. They believe that it is global trade, CEOs, and politicians who support free trade that are, who play a much bigger role in the decline of middle class incomes. They are more worried that there'll be tax breaks for that the rich will keep getting tax breaks the way they did in the Bush era. They are worried that trade will go too far. When we ask about government regulation, on whether it is government regulation of business and corporations is necessary to protect the public, or whether it'll cause, frequently does more harm than good, what you see is a surge of support for regulation in this election. So people, I think, have come to this with big thoughts. We did a survey, with Arch Gillies and Bold Politics. Cheryl was involved in this as well. I think you may even have written some of these paragraphs. But we tried to look at this era, and this was done well before the election, but this year. It was done in June. And we said, we gave them a description of the 30s and the 70s and the 90s. And it's important because, the 92 was an election where economy stupid was, the first issue. And we said, our current situation most closely resembles the early 90s with a stagnant economy suffering from irresponsible management, huge deficits, and economic inequality. And like Clinton did when he was elected, we must regain our prosperity by restoring fiscal discipline, making millionaires pay their fair share, and giving working Americans real tax relief. The 1930s descriptions, our current situation most closely resembles the early 1930s, with our economy laid flat by speculative excesses on Wall Street, by rising inequality and stagnant wages. Like Franklin Roosevelt did, we must restore middle-class prosperity by investing in homeowners and regions throughout the country and by curbing the power of big business and special interests. When we asked a series of things. We also had a description of the 70s and the Reagan era. When we compared the 30s and the 70s, the 30s, dominated that. When we compared the 90s and the 70s, what you saw was the 70s dominated that. People do not think this is 1992. And when we compare the, this amongst independents, what you find is when we give people a statement to describe our current era, what you see is that describing this as needing dramatic changes to restore the middle class or to restore our standing in the world, however you frame it, over 80% think there's a great deal of truth in this. I'll just read one of them. America's great leaders like Jefferson, Lincoln, FDR recognized our greatness is built in vibrant and growing middle class. That's why they invested in programs that allowed the middle class to thrive. But now our middle class is being squeezed by stagnant wages, rising costs, while all the gains of our economy go only to the wealthiest amongst us. If we don't see, I told you this was a poetry reading. If we don't want to see American middle class disappear, we need to dramatically change our company's economic policies. 82%, great deal of truth. Now, this was done in June. This was before the crisis of September 15th and afterwards. That the people, I believe, see this era, already viewed it era in big times because of the critique they've formulated about the times, about the Bush presidency, and I think this has become crystallized by what we now face. I think the election. I want to do some questions, but I think that the close of the election, we should not forget the close of this election in the kind of more kind of opaque joy and hopefulness in the result. This was a debate about the economic direction of the country in a big way. And the mandate is in the policies, but the mandate is also contained in the era that we're trying to close and the new era that's open. I think we should view this as a dynamic period where people are coming to the economy in new ways. Investment is already close to the top in infrastructure as a way of doing this in new ways. It's not been on the table in a serious way till now. I think if we do our part, this moves becomes elevated, becomes part of a new explanation of how we restore our prosperity. Thank you.